Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Chinese Communist Espionage, an Intelligence Primer, by Matthew Brazil and Peter Mattis, narrated by David Vries. Preface. This book is the result of collaboration between Peter Mattis, an analyst of the Modern People's Republic of China, PRC, intelligence community, and Matthew Brazil, a historian of early Chinese Communist Party (CCP) intelligence operations and a former corporate investigator. We hope that this material will be of interest to those seeking a clearer understanding of how China conducts espionage. Even though everyone spies, the methods by which the PRC pursues secret intelligence are too often shrouded in unnecessary mystery. This can lead to miscalculation, misunderstanding, and prejudice by governments protecting national security information and businesses protecting trade secrets. Perhaps more importantly, it distorts and harms bilateral relations between China and its important diplomatic and trading partners, particularly the United States and Japan. The mystery is partly of our own making. This field is neglected by China watchers, sometimes to avoid somehow upsetting commerce or other institutional relations with China, but also because of the thin veil of the Chinese language. Many recently published works on Chinese espionage in English fail to pierce that veil or even to give it a fair go, using few, if any, Chinese language sources. It is as if someone in Beijing wrote a book about the U.S. intelligence community without examining English language sources. We have consulted numerous Chinese publications, books, and other materials. However, we believe that we have only scratched the surface. Few are more aware than the handful of authors who have delved into this arena of the vast and unexplored range of published Chinese language works on intelligence, unofficial samizdat-type literature, and unopened archives that will eventually bring additional clarity to this murky world. However, we hope that we have begun a more critical analysis of this darker corner of Chinese communist history and governance than is evident in the increasingly mythologized accounts that have come out of Beijing in recent times. In writing a reference guide, we do not intend to provide the definitive answers, but rather to introduce the history of intelligence within the CCP and the modern party state. Systematically sketching the key figures, organizations, and espionage cases invites listeners to draw their own conclusions about PRC intelligence services, their activities, and their methods. By contrast, much of the existing analysis and commentary about Chinese intelligence is anecdotal or drawn from the observations of security professionals who cannot speak freely. The experience of these professionals often is limited to a fraction of the PRC's clandestine activity. Focusing only on economic espionage, the activities of intelligence services, United Front work, or theft in cyberspace would result in misleading conclusions about what the PRC does in each of the other areas, reminiscent of the parable of the elephant and the blind men. By contrast, we make a broader attempt to explain what today's PRC intelligence services do and the roots of their work in CCP history. The value of a reference guide lies in making a lot of data easily accessible. Between the limitations of English language works and the narrow lens through which most security professionals look at PRC intelligence, there is a need to shine a light across the breadth and historical depth of this activity. The needs of the present often require journalists and analysts to emphasize the new rather than the continuous. We hope this reference guide enables those who must meet the needs of today to see both continuity and novelty with greater clarity. The views expressed in this book are the author's alone, and not those of the U.S. government, CECC, or anyone in them. Introduction. For the employees of a certain Chinese government ministry in Beijing, the coldest day of 2011 was not in winter. It was on the morning that all personnel were ordered to view the execution of one of their comrades, who had been exposed as a spy for the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, and his pregnant wife. The two were shot in the ministry's interior courtyard, the proceedings shown on closed-circuit television. The man's sentence was only one of a dozen or more lethal warnings to the Chinese bureaucracy between late 2010 and December 2012. The state and the ruling Chinese Communist Party, CCP, would not tolerate disloyalty by those entrusted with its secrets. There would be no mercy, even for the unborn child of a traitor. The forces of state security had destroyed CIA networks in China, and woe to anyone who tried to revive them. Why does the CCP react in such a vociferous and lethal manner to a crime that would draw only a prison sentence elsewhere? One answer lies in how close the party has come to being destroyed by betrayal, whether from allies or spies within. For Americans and others in the West, foreign espionage and related intelligence failures have been perilous, but have not really been threats to national existence. The Japanese attack in Hawaii on December 7, 1941, shook the U.S. government and especially its intelligence establishment, which vowed never to be so surprised again, though September 11, 2001 might qualify as a reminder. In both cases, the United States may have stumbled, but these intelligence setbacks did not prevent the nation from recovering and fighting back hard. The CCP had its own versions of Pearl Harbor and September 11, but by contrast, they almost destroyed communism in China. They underline how intelligence, defined as useful information and analytic products to guide decisions regarding an enemy, and security, protective measures against hostile acts, began to blend in Chinese party and state organizations. On April 12, 1927, the party was surprised almost to death by what it called a counter-revolutionary coup. The perpetrators were the CCP's erstwhile allies, the Chinese Nationalist Party, KMT, whose soldiers and police rounded up and executed thousands of communists in Shanghai and other cities. The nationalists called it the 1927 Party Cleansing, when they rid themselves of infiltrators who intended to subvert and overthrow the KMT leadership. At the end of the coup, the CCP had only 2,000 to 3,000 soldiers remaining, and its overall membership dropped from 60,000 to 10,000. But 2 decades later, Mao Zedong's CCP kicked the nationalists out of mainland China, in part by planting countless spies inside the nationalist government to rot it from within. The April 12 incident in 1927 led to the birth of the Red Army on August 1 and the founding later that year of clandestine operations, assassination squads, and finally a professional intelligence service that absorbed them, the Special Services Section, SSS. Today's ministries of state security and public security consider the SSS to be their predecessor. The struggles of the SSS to survive and gather enemy intelligence form important parts of the party's founding narrative. The successes celebrated today are not entirely hyperbole and are vital to understanding both the history of Chinese communism and the behavior of the contemporary Chinese party state with its impressive surveillance apparatus. The early years of the SSS were marked by hard-earned gains and lucky breaks to collect intelligence on the KMT and maintain the party's underground presence inside China's cities. In April 1931, the SSS's greatest operational success clashed with its greatest failure. From 1929, the service ran a small 3-man spy ring, now known as the Three Heroes of the Dragon's Lair, Longtong Sanjia, in the heart of the KMT's intelligence apparatus. The intelligence provided by these men, Qian Zhuangfei, Li Kenong, and Hu Di, allowed the communists operating in the cities to stay a step ahead of KMT security organs. Qian in particular furnished actionable intelligence because his talent and origins earned him a job as the private secretary for Xu Ensang, UT Xu, the chief of KMT intelligence. From this vantage point, he saw everything that crossed Xu's desk and more. Assassinations and mayhem, however, were as much the province of the SSS as any delicate intelligence operation. The SSS Operations Section Tsingdongke murdered collaborators, set off car bombs, and assassinated KMT officials. These Red Brigades, or dog-beating squads as they became known, attracted at least as many thugs as committed communists. Gu Xuanzhang, its guiding light, who doubled as SSS director, was one of the former, despite his labor activism. A talented magician and master of disguise, Gu also participated directly in the section's operations. In April 1931, local KMT security officials in Wuhan recognized and arrested him. Gu knew as well as anyone that he faced torture and death at the hands of the KMT and agreed to cooperate. He warned his captors, however, that they should remain silent about his arrest until he could be brought to KMT intelligence headquarters in Nanjing. Gu knew of Xian and the two other heroes, but did not identify them. Gu's captors ignored his advice and cabled Nanjing, crowing over their success in capturing the CCP's head spy. The telegrams arrived at Chu's office after he had departed for the day and fell into the hands of Xiang Zhuangfei. CCP knowledge of Gu's capture and agreement to cooperate spurred a frantic rush to vacate urban hideouts. Gu had a detailed knowledge not just of his section and its work, but also of the CCP's underground infrastructure across China's cities. Communist safe houses, communications protocols, true names and aliases, cover organizations, and spies within the KMT, all were in Gu's head. Xian, Li, and Hu's cover may have been blown, but not before Xian gave the CCP at least a 12-hour head start. That lead time allowed the Communists to begin destroying relevant documents and ordering cadres to flee the city. The three heroes of the Dragon's Lair saved the urban CCP leadership in spite of the failure of vetting and indoctrination to identify Gu Xuanzhang's unreliability. Meanwhile, Mao and the Red Army remained safely out of reach in the remote mountains of Jiangxi, to which the leadership retreated. However, the damage Gu wrought nearly destroyed the party's urban presence. The KMT central government rounded up thousands of communists in the cities, though key figures such as future Premier Zhou Enlai, future five-star General Chang Gang, and Chen Yun escaped the dragnet. As a number of party luminaries, such as Mao Zedong and Marshal Ya Jianying, would later note, the three-hero spy ring changed the course of the Chinese Revolution by saving key cadre. The episode has engendered countless books, essays, and movies because it is a place where historical truth and propagandistic convenience overlap. The party narratives, however, are less forthcoming about the subsequent collapse of the SSS, even as they applaud the KMT's execution of Gu sometime in 1935. Gu's defection critically weakened SSS operations, and the party disbanded the unit in 1935. As the locus of CCP power shifted to the countryside and the Jiangxi Soviet, so too did the party's intelligence apparatus. Many of those brought in to run the Political Protection Bureau, PPB, under the Central Committee, and the Second Bureau of the Central Revolutionary Military Commission, CRMC, the forerunner of today's Central Military Commission, CMC, began their intelligence careers in the SSS. Xian Zhuangfei ran the Bureau's training program in radio interception and analysis. Li Kenong also served as a CRMC deputy director and as head of the Jiangxi province branch of the PPB. Others, such as Chen Yun, Kang Sheng, and Pan Hanyan, would fight a rear-guard action in the cities to preserve the CCP's intelligence operations before fleeing to communist base areas. The CRMC Second Bureau would become similarly legendary for saving the party during the KMT encirclement campaigns, 1930-34, and the Long March. Although the impact of this military intelligence department cannot be denied, most approved Chinese sources obfuscate the reasons for the Second Bureau's successes in exploiting KMT communications. For many years, the KMT did not encipher their communications, sending messages entirely in the clear. This allowed the Second Bureau to intercept enemy radio traffic, build a comprehensive order of battle, be alert to enemy operations, and locate their units. As the KMT introduced ciphers, the Second Bureau did not develop a strong deciphering capability, but rather learned to exploit captured and stolen code books. The successes of Red Army operations during the Long March seemed to correlate directly with where the Second Bureau could rely on its existing order of battle knowledge and enemy ciphers. If SSS operations demonstrated the value of intelligence in protecting the party, then the Second Bureau showed the value of integrating command and intelligence to seize the initiative and use the smaller Red Army effectively against superior forces. The CRMC Second Bureau began the history of the People's Liberation Army, PLA, intelligence apparatus. Today's Intelligence Bureau in the Joint Staff Department and Strategic Support Force would see themselves as direct descendants. Although the history of military intelligence falls strangely silent for much of the period between the end of the Long March in 1935 and the founding of the People's Republic of China, PRC, in 1949, intelligence remained an important brace for Red Army leadership. During the Liaoshen Campaign, 1948, in the Northeast, Lin Biao would travel with intelligence personnel as part of his command train. Peng Dehui, while in command of the 8th Route Army in 1940 in eastern China, told newly arrived civilian intelligence personnel that they reported to him and his intelligence chief rather than to their own headquarters in Yan'an. In short, the CCP early on understood the value of intelligence for the party's security and military operations. Understanding these early years is critical for two reasons. First, since 1927, the CCP has considered intelligence a professional activity that requires dedicated organizations to conduct it. Even as these organizations were established and eventually eroded, another organization always arose to take up the mantle. The SSS was absorbed into the Political Protection Bureau, which also shared personnel with the CRMC Second Bureau. Some officers in each moved into the successor Social Affairs Department, the Red Army's General Staff, the 8th Route Army's intelligence units, and so on, almost to the present day. Only after the founding of the PRC in 1949 did clearer lines start to emerge between the party, state, and military intelligence units with distinct career patterns. Second, the heroes of these operations and veterans of these organizations played key roles in Chinese intelligence until their deaths. This founding generation of intelligence officers remained active into the 1980s. Premier Zhou Enlai, the first SSS director, involved himself in domestic and foreign intelligence operations almost until his death in 1976. Liang Guangpu, who led the General Staff Department's Intelligence Bureau from 1978 to 1982, ran the CRMC Second Bureau's Wireless Training Academy in Zhuijin in the early 1930s. Li Kenong, one of the three heroes of the Dragon's Lair, would wear both party and military intelligence hats throughout the rest of his career until his death in 1962, and he contributed to the first operational histories and training materials as Chinese intelligence professionalized in the late 1930s. Many other names, for example, Ya Jianying, Wu Shuchuan, Liao Chengzhe, Luo Jingchang, appear repeatedly throughout this history for their roles in shaping the relationship between decision-makers and intelligence officers, as well as the process of intelligence. Troubled politics, troubled intelligence. Looking back at the history of the CCP since its founding in 1921, several themes emerge that are useful to understand the effect of Chinese communist intelligence and security operations on the party's development and on modern China itself. Closely weighing these themes has helped us separate the CCP's propaganda line from what can be discerned from reliable and validated data and what can be inferred, and from matters where only an informed guess is possible. The first theme is often termed red versus expert. This widespread tension between those of proven political loyalty and the technically competent was evident early in the Revolution, and took different forms that did not specifically denigrate expertise per se until after 1956. A variant on this theme that heavily influenced CCP intelligence is tension between the party's ideologues and counterspies on the one hand, and its intelligence professionals and the highly trained secret agents they dispatched on the other. Intelligence officers and agents who were successful in gathering enemy secrets did so in part by cultivating contacts with the other side, including liars, thieves, smugglers, drug dealers, and, of course, traitors. In a stinging irony, by successfully stealing enemy secrets, these communist officers and agents exposed themselves, in the best of times, to doubts about their loyalty. In the worst of times, ideologues and counterspies who seldom, if ever, had to leave the safety of the CCP's base areas purged their own intelligence people for doing their jobs, motivated at least in part by the radical policy prescriptions and, at times, the paranoia of Mao Zedong. This was the fate of senior intelligence official Pan Hanyan after he confessed in 1955 to not reporting an important meeting 12 years earlier with Wang Jingwei, the leader of the Japanese puppet government. Between 800 and 1,000 CCP intelligence officers and agents were demoted, fired, or imprisoned in the subsequent purge ordered by Mao. The 1955 intelligence purge was just the first wave in a series of losses in the ranks of the PRC intelligence community. Later that year, Zhou Enlai conceived and Mao Zedong approved a reorganization that led to the founding of the party's first permanent foreign intelligence organ, the Central Investigation Department, CID. In the following decade, the organization grew, built standard procedures, and forged interagency cooperation. But when the Cultural Revolution began in 1966, the CID was not exempted from the chaos. Rival Red Guard factions formed within the department, each competing with the other to represent true adherence to Mao's thought. As the radical left under Mao's wife, Jiang Xing, and the Cultural Revolution group ascended, almost the entire senior leadership of the CID was purged. Fighting within forced Zhou and Mao to engineer a military takeover of the department in March 1967 to protect its secrets from leaking off premises and into Red Guard newspapers. The death of Mao in 1976 and the end of the Cultural Revolution did not end purges in the intelligence field. The next housecleaning was directed against an unknown number of Cultural Revolutionary beneficiaries, chiefly Luo Qingzhang, the new CID director and the only senior intelligence leader from 1966 who survived the deluge. But Luo hung on for years, just as in the rest of society leftists did not simply withdraw in shame and fear with the December 1978 return of Deng Xiaoping to the party's core leadership. In fact, Luo resisted change. Notably, he encouraged subordinates to ignore a speech made by Deng at a foreign affairs conference the next summer where he urged intelligence reforms and enhanced clandestine operations outside of PRC embassies. Luo was finally ousted for good in 1983 with the formation of the Ministry of State Security, MSS, though to this day he retains an inexplicably honored place in CCP intelligence history. However, the three purges in 1955, 1967, and 1983 produced an unmeasured decline in talent available to the PRC intelligence community as it shifted from a place in the party to a government ministry under the State Council. These purges, extending even beyond Mao Zedong's rule, reflect how the party's struggle, criticism, transformation ideal continues to drive events. That often gruesome influence on Chinese communist intelligence operations can still be observed. Intelligence into the modern era. The politics of the MSS's establishment in 1983 coincided with Deng Xiaoping's policy of reform and opening that increased China's engagement with the outside world. In 1975, Deng began drafting plans for the 4 modernizations: agriculture, industry, science, and national defense, to make China rich and powerful. These modernization programs required importing technical and managerial knowledge from advanced capitalist economies. How to do this was unknown. China's break from the Soviet Union in the 1950s led to policies of self-sufficiency and undermined the party's leaders' ability to understand the outside world. With relatively few important diplomatic relationships and weakened intelligence resources, Deng's China needed to both experiment diplomatically and to educate its own leadership about the outside world. China's intelligence apparatus, however, was ill-prepared to support these intelligence needs. The aforementioned purges had reduced the size and the operational knowledge of the civilian intelligence cadre. Moreover, when the civilian ministries and the party bureaucracy were disbanded in 1967, one of 2 things happened. Either agents lost contact with their handlers, and in some cases only reconnected a decade later with mixed successes in maintaining the intelligence relationship, or the PLA General Staff Department's Second Bureau, 2PLA, took over the handling of many CID agents, and there is no sign that the agents necessarily returned to civilian control when the party bureaucracy stood back up. When the MSS was created a few years later, its personnel came predominantly from the counterintelligence elements of the Ministry of Public Security, MPS. Even the First Minister, Ling Yun, came from an internal security background. Although the information is sketchy, Deng Xiaoping appears to have turned to his friends in the military for intelligence. During Deng's brief rehabilitation in 1975 as the PLA chief of the General Staff, he brought intelligence veteran and former diplomat Wu Shouchuan back as a deputy chief of the General Staff and as 2PLA director. Wu expanded 2PLA's open-source intelligence in 1979 by creating the Beijing, now China, Institute for International and Strategic Studies, to collect and analyze the strategy of the Soviet Union and other major countries. Other significant 2PLA leaders, such as Liu Guangfu, 1978–82, Zhang Zhongru, 1982–85, and Cao Xin, 1985–88, began their careers under the CRMC Second Bureau or the 8th Route Army, and some, such as Cao and Wu, served directly with Deng. These connections are not the only indicators that Deng relied on the military for intelligence. The PLA dominated the major externally facing leading small groups, most notably those for Taiwan and foreign affairs, which set overall policy guidance. The Minister of State Security would not join the foreign affairs leading small group until the mid to late 1990s, isolating the ministry. Although the MSS chiefs were politically reliable, there is no indication that they were the kind of political heavyweights who did not need a formal position to be influential. In 1985, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, echoing Deng's 1979 speech on foreign affairs, argued the MSS presence in official missions should be reduced and operationally restricted, lest the discovery of its operations derail the foreign relationships critical to Deng's modernization program. Deng's reliance on the PLA cemented the military's role as the primary foreign intelligence provider, but it had a few unintended consequences that reverberate to the present day. Focusing on foreign intelligence advanced the careers of 2PLA defense attachés, creating a cadre of military intelligence leaders led by Xiong Guangkai, who had little to no experience in military operations. From 1988 to 2006, the defense attachés led PLA intelligence, even overseeing the signals intelligence apparatus. In one sense, this new generation of intelligence officers were PLA outsiders. For example, Xiong spent much of his early career abroad as a defense attaché and in analytic positions at 2PLA headquarters. He served and was educated entirely within military intelligence. His predecessor as Deputy Chief of the General Staff with the intelligence portfolio, Xu Xin, however, served in a broader range of positions. Xu originally was an infantry officer serving in Dong.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?